Hey viewers, today I'm going to show you how you can use VBA to automatically apply formulas after you refresh some data. So let's say you have a worksheet that contains a mix of data and formulas. After refreshing the data, you find you've got extra rows. So here you'd have to manually copy down the formulas. Likewise, if you refresh the data and you have less rows, you need to manually delete any extras. But if your data extends beyond the visible screen, you may not notice it and forget to apply the formulas, and you end up with incorrect results. So that's where automation is useful. But firstly, let's take a look at some manual approaches which may be more appropriate if you only have one or two worksheets. So one approach is to just replicate the formulas down for an arbitrary number of rows, just anticipating how much data you might have in future. Now that's not completely foolproof, so another approach is to add a note up the top to just say, after refreshing the data, copy down the formulas. And you can make that red, bold, whatever you like. You could even just apply both methods if you prefer. Now, if you have many formulas that you need to copy down across multiple worksheets, you're better off automating. So for the macro, we need to cover both situations where there's more or less data than previous. So I like to break down the macro into three main steps. The first part is to delete all existing rows. Then secondly, is to refresh the data, so import it from an external workbook or database, perhaps even manually copy it, whatever the case may be. The third part is to then apply the formulas down to all the rows. Now the formulas don't all have to be at the end here. You may have formulas in between columns. That should work as well. Now the first thing I want to do is define the start row and the last row. And I'll do that using two formulas, which I place up in the top row and usually hide it, but you don't need to do that. Now I'm not going to go into too much detail as I talk about these in many of my other videos, in particular how to find last row and columns using VBA, so please check that out. So for the first data row, we get the row of the header and then add 1. Now the reason I don't just say row 6 is that when we delete rows, we'll get a ref error because we're deleting row 6. So we always use the header and add 1. And because it's a formula, it makes it dynamic. So if I was to insert a row here, the row has moved down to 6, so the first data row has automatically changed to 7. For the last row, use this lookup formula, all right? And it's going to return the last non-blank in column B. All right, now this is a commonly used formula out there on the web, so you can either look at my videos to see how this works or check out other sources. Now, if the macro is going to delete the rows, we're going to lose the formulas. First, copy all the formulas into the top row. Make sure you include any cell or number formats as well. If you have any formulas in other columns in between the data, make sure you copy them up as well. So then the macro can delete all the rows, import the data, and then copy the formulas from the top row down to as many rows as there are. Let's head over to the VBA editor, Alt F11. Now I've already written the code for this, so we can step through it. So the subroutine refresh data, I have some variables defined up the top, and I'll explain some of them as I use them. The next thing I do is disable settings. Now these are some settings that I disable at the beginning of a macro and re-enable them at the very end. There are benefits of doing that. Please check out my video on disable these settings in your macro. if you want to know a bit more about it, I'll give you a quick look at the subroutine. So disable settings. If disable parameter is set to true, it's going to disable calculation, display alerts, screen updating, and enable events. If it's set to false, it's going to re-enable them. And what each one of these does is explained in that video. All right, so the next thing, in my example, I'm going to be importing the data, refreshing the data from an external workbook, but it could be from a database, it could be another source like a text file, a CSV file, or whatever. So here I've set the path and the file name that I'm going to use, and then opening a workbook using the workbooks.open and setting that open workbook to this variable WB, which is defined as a workbook. All right. So WB is pointing to that open workbook. The next line of code, we're setting WS source SRC to sheet 1 within that workbook. So WS SRC is defined as a worksheet up here. Now the next thing is getting the start row and the last row that we defined in our Excel worksheet. If you remember, B1 and C1. All right, now normally I don't hard code the cell references, but for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to do that. I usually use named ranges, and I talk about that in my how to reference ranges videos. It's just much more dynamic. If these cells were to move, I would have to come and change these cell references. But using a named range, you don't need to. So this is just saying, get cell B1 from the sales worksheet. And here I'm using what's known as the code name. I do have a video on that, how to reference worksheets. There are advantages of using the code name over the standard worksheets and then the sheet name, sales in this case. But for the purpose of this video, wherever you see WS sales, just think of it as worksheets sales. I'll just give you a quick rundown of how you can set the code name. But for more detail and also to hear about the advantages, please check out my video. So if you come over to the left pane here where the project is, select the sheet, then come down to the properties pane. Now if you don't have that, press F4 and it should open it up for you. Now this name is the code name, and by default, every sheet will have a code name. It'll be sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, and so on. You can change it to whatever you like. My naming convention is WS for worksheet and then a name for the worksheet. You could use an acronym if it's too long. And the beauty of it is you can just use that name directly in the code, even if you use the default. You can say sheet1 dot range and so on. And the beauty of that is it's independent from the tab name on the Excel worksheet. Now, the next thing we want to get is the range of rows that we're going to delete. So we do that by saying WS sales and rows starting from the start row, colon, to the last row. Right? And we're storing that range in this variable RNG, so range dest, destination. You can call it whatever you want. It's defined as a range. So this is effectively going start, the last row, and the variable is pointing to this entire range of rows. And then delete it. So it's just going to delete all those rows. The next thing is grab the range B4 to F16 from the source worksheet, pointing this variable to that range. We don't actually store the data. And that is like the range destination is defined as a range. So that variable is referencing this range from that external workbook. Now I'm going to point the destination range just to cell B and start row, which is 6. So B6 of the sales worksheet. So essentially here. So source is pointing to the external sheet and destination is pointing to this cell here, B6. The next line of code is copy the source range, so B4 F16 from the source file, and then pasting special values and number formats into destination, so into B start row, so B6. Okay, and then application cut copy mode equals false. That just removes the ants from our copy. And I'll go through this with a debugger so you can see it working. After that, we're going to close the workbook. So if WB is nothing equals false, meaning the workbook is open, so it's pointing to something valid, then close it and don't save. So false is don't save. Now the next thing we're going to do is get the last row. So now that we've pasted the data, we need to know what is the last row, as it may have changed. Now because I turned off the calculations in my disable settings, I need to re-enable it, okay? Because I'm using this formula here to calculate the last row, because I disabled the calculations, it won't recalculate the new last row because I disabled those settings. So I re-enable it here. So last row, and I'm going to get that last row again, which is now going to be recalculated from C1 here. So if we had more rows here, it would reflect the last row. Now I'm going to copy the range of formulas down into the destination. So the way we do that is I'm going to point the source range to the formulas up here. So in row 1, H1 to K1 from the sales sheet into here. Again, I don't like to hard code these, but for the purpose of this video, it's much easier just doing that. And the destination is going to be from here down to K of the last row, right? So we don't know what that last row is, so we're using the last row value here and the start row here, as that can change. So sales sheet range H start row all the way, so colon to K last row. All right, so whatever that is. So from here to here in this case, if there was more data, so if our data extended down to here, it will go from here down to here. So then we're going to copy H1 to K1 and paste formulas and number formats into that range that we defined here, and then paste the formats too. It's going to copy these formulas down into here and also paste the formats. And then at the end, remove the ants and re-enable the settings. I'll come back to this commented out code in a moment. Now, because I disabled the settings, as I mentioned earlier, and I disabled the calculations, when I do the paste special and paste the formulas and number formats, if I don't re-enable the calculations, it won't recalculate until the very end where I re-enable them. Okay, so keep that in mind for when I talk about this thing here. All right, so let's just see this happening. What I'm going to do is put a breakpoint here, and this is a very useful tool. It's the debugger. I do have a video on how to debug in VBA, so please check that out. This is going to let me step through the code line by line so we can see what's happening. All right, so I'm going to click the refresh and it's going to stop on that very first line. So disable settings. Now I'm just going to do Shift F8 and that's just going to run that disable settings. I don't need to go into it line by line. Now we're going to set the file name and it's going to now open the workbook. So F8 is stepping line by line. So it's going to open that workbook. And here it is. You can see the workbook. This is our source data. Right. So the source sheet is going to be pointing to sheet 1. So sheet 1, there we go. That's sheet 1 down here. Now I'm going to get the start row and the last row. So F8, start row is 6. Zoom in here. Start row is 6. Last row, I haven't run it yet, so it's 0. If I press F8, you can now see it's 14, right? And then I'm going to set that destination to range to be the start row to the last row, right here. Now, if I go down into this immediate window, if you press Control G, it'll open this window for you if you don't have it. Question mark means print. If I say rngdest.address, you will see that it's going to show me rows 6 to 14. There you go. So that's another handy thing with the debugger. So please check out that video. And now we're going to delete that range of rows. All right, so if we go back to the main sheet here, it's going to delete all of these. All right, here we go. F8. It's deleted all the rows. Now it's going to copy range B4 to F16 from the source. So set the range, set the destination, copy that B4 to F16. So if I go to the source, you can see the ants around that range. It's not including the headers. And then paste it into the B6 of the main workbook. Paste the data. There's more rows than there was before. And then remove those ants from the source sheet. Now I'm going to close the source sheet and not save it. Closed it. Re-enable the calculations. And now the last row, which currently is 14, because I haven't updated it. So if we have a look at this, 14. But because I enabled the calculations, it's recalculated it on the worksheet. If I press F8, it is now showing me 18. Set the range now to the formulas in the first row. The destination range to H6 and K18. Right, so copy the formulas. You can see the ants around the formulas, and it's now going to paste them into here. So copy and paste the formulas and number formats, right? And paste the formats, all right? And then remove the ants. Click on and disable the settings. False means re-enable them, all right? And it's done, all right? There you go. As you can see, it's reapplied them. Now, the good thing with this method is the user can now come and change the formulas if they need to. They don't need to get in touch with you. They can change the formulas if they have to. and the macro will automatically take whatever's up here and apply it down there. Likewise, they can change the format. If the user wants to change that, they could do that. They could even, let's say, make these light gray, right? And let's make this, instead of general, up the top it's general, I'm going to make this into a number. And we'll leave 2 decimal places just so you can see what it does, all right? Same with the date. Let's change the date to be 4-digit year, all right? So when we run it again, it's going to use these number formats and even the cell format, so the shading. All right, so let me run it again. I'll just get rid of that breakpoint, and F5 will run the whole thing. It's shaded all the data, applied that new formatting, even to the date. If I wanted to change the actual formulas, it would reapply them as well. So this is a very handy way to apply formulas and give the user that flexibility to change them without having to get in touch with you. Now, if you have a lot of data or very complex formulas, this could slow down your workbook. And if that happens, what you can do is, after you've pasted the formulas down, you can replace the formulas with values. Right? And we can do that in our macro. Now, the way we do that is with this code here. Again, I want to make sure that the calculations are enabled. Now, I do that up here, so I don't need it in this case. Make sure you always set them to automatic in case you had disabled them using disable settings. So what this is doing, after we've copied the source and pasted it into the destination, pasted the numbers and formats, pasted the formats, we copy the destination, so that actual range that we pasted into, and then do paste values and number formats. It's going to get rid of the formulas, but the formulas will still exist in that very top row. So as you can see, we currently have formulas in here. If I come to here, F2, you can see we have formulas all the way down. Right. I'm going to run it again, and this time we'll only have formulas up here, and the rest will be values. Run, and it's done. Here we go. There's no formulas. Okay. So that's up to you to decide whether you need to do that or not. In this case, I don't really need it. There's not much data. So I can just run it again. Because the formulas are still up here, they still exist here, they get transferred down after we refresh the data. Let me show you what would happen if you disable the calculations at the very beginning, as we did, but do not re-enable them before replacing formulas with values. Okay, so we're going to replace with values here. I'm not going to re-enable the calculations. However, I do re-enable it up the top here, so I'll just turn that one off. Because it's not recalculating, I'm just going to set the row number manually just for this test. Okay, so what's going to happen, it's going to copy the formulas and number formats and the formatting down. It's not going to recalculate, and it's going to replace them with values. So let's see what happens. So what it's done, it's copied these formulas down for every row. It hasn't recalculated, then replaced with values. So we're left with just the original values that you see in row 1. So you need to make sure to re-enable the calculations before you do replace with values. Now, if you didn't disable it at the very beginning, then you shouldn't have any problem. Well, that's about it. hope you found this useful. If you did, please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.